Then eventually a wolf does in fact show up. And when the boy tells the parents that there's a wolf outside, the parents no longer believe him, and the wolf eats the boy, right? Now, what's happening in that story is Kant's point, right? That the structure of the lie cannot be universalized, because if everyone lied in every situation, if everyone always lied, then lies would no longer work, right? In order for a lie to work, people have to assume that in general, you're telling the truth. If people anticipate that you're lying or expect you to lie, then you can't get away with the lie. And so the lie structurally cannot be universalized. Conversely, truth-telling can be universalized. There is no conflict in people telling the truth all the time. In fact, the more people tell the truth, the more the truth is reinforced. By universalizing it, it becomes stronger. So what Kant means by the idea that something can be universalized or not is, if it's universalized, will it undermine its own capacity to function? Will the logic of that thing stop functioning? And what he means is that anything that can't be universalized in that way is inherently irrational and not based in reason. Now, excuse me, the other example, well, so first of all, let me pause and say, Zoom is saying they're going to end our session in 7 minutes and 30 seconds. What we'll do when that happens is, I think we can try and start a new meeting and get another 40 minutes, which we don't have to use all of. So I will start a new meeting and invite you all back. And if that doesn't work, then I will finish in a video and send it to you. But just a heads up, if this shuts down in 7 minutes, look for another email with a different meeting. Zoom really ought to waive this 40-minute thing for now. But in any case, Kant takes this idea extremely seriously. We'll talk more about this idea of the structure of the lie and the idea that right, the logic of what is immoral undermines itself when it's universalized. Let's have a Blackboard conversation about that also. Kant's extremely strict about this this moral principle against lying. There was a philosopher named Benjamin Constant who wrote Kant a letter about this idea of never lying, that it is always wrong to lie. And he asks, let's say you have a friend who is being hunted by a murderer. And this friend comes to you and asks you to hide them in your house. And you say, of course, come on in, you can hide from the murderer in my house. The next day, the murderer shows up and asks you, hey, have you seen your friend? Constant's question is it moral to lie to the murderer and say that you haven't seen your friend, right? And in that lie, to potentially save your friend's life? Kant's answer is no. It is still immoral to lie to the murderer, even though it endangers your friend. So how can this be? Why would Kant say this? This is a point that turns a lot of people off to Kant's ethics. It makes them sound too severe. Right? But Kant's point would be, your desire to save your friend is again based on self-interest. It's based on your sphere of social concern. It's based on anthropological concerns. It's not based in the moral law. You cannot universalize lying, and therefore to lie is always in every case wrong. Your desire to save your friend may be nice, it may be good, and certainly it's in your interest. But that is not a question of morality. And so Kant is extremely strict in saying, truly, in no circumstances is it acceptable to lie. And so the next question we'd want to ask, and we'll get to this, is, well, then what is the value of this moral law? All right, fine. Right? Reason dictates that lying can't be universalized, and therefore you can't say that lying is ever truly moral because it's not truly rational. Well, then what's the value of this rational moral law? Why should I follow it? That's a question that we'll get to at the end of today, and we'll pick up again next class when we read the two essays by Kant. So really quickly, the other example that Kant gives of the categorical imperative, an example of an act that undermines its own logic, which can't be universalized structurally, and which is internally inconsistent, is suicide. And in one sense, this is obvious, right? I could never will that everyone should commit suicide in every case. That is self-defeating and undermining in itself, right? If you were to will that, very quickly there would be no one left to commit suicide, and it wouldn't be universalizable anymore. But Kant's answer and reason for thinking this is a little bit tighter, because he doesn't want to take into consideration the world, right, in actual anthropological practical circumstances. He wants to have these analytic analyses of whether or not something is rational or not. So is it rational to commit suicide? Kant thinks no, right? You desire suicide, and all desire is for some object. You desire a release from pain or an escape from some situation. But suicide is that which cuts off all desire, undermines desire. And so the desire for suicide is, Kant thinks, self-contradictory, and therefore inherently irrational and thus immoral. So we've got less than a minute. I don't know. Let's see what happens here. They're probably going to shut us down. I will try and start another meeting. We've got a few more important things to go over in this text, but let's see if they actually kick us off. I'll just keep talking. So truth-telling and suicide are the two main examples that Kant gives of a categorical imperative which is supported by pure rationality, which are analytically, self-evidently moral. The second form of the categorical imperative, right? So the first form of the categorical imperative is act according to that maxim that you could will to be a universal law, or do what is universalizable. The second form of the categorical imperative states, this is on page 29, states,